The wind roared like a wild beast, tearing through the town with unstoppable force. Trees bent and snapped, their broken limbs crashing onto the streets. Power lines sparked as they fell, sending flickers of light through the darkness before everything was swallowed by the night. Rain pounded the earth, turning roads into rivers of mud. In the middle of the storm, Rusty ran. His fur was soaked, clinging to his lean frame, and his paws splashed through puddles as he weaved through the wreckage. He had no home to return to, no human calling his name. For as long as he could remember, he had wandered these streets, surviving on scraps and the kindness of strangers. But tonight was different. Tonight, something felt wrong. A deafening crack split the air. Rusty skidded to a stop just as a massive tree came crashing down behind him, barely missing his tail. He let out a sharp bark, his heart pounding. The town was in ruins. He could hear distant shouts, the wail of sirens, and the low rumble of buildings collapsing under the storm's relentless assault. Lightning flashed, illuminating the destruction for a brief moment. Rusty's sharp eyes scanned the wreckage. Houses lay in pieces, their walls ripped away, their roofs crushed beneath fallen trees. The scent of rain mixed with something else, something unfamiliar. It was fear, panic, desperation. Rusty moved forward cautiously, his paws sinking into the muddy ground. He passed a car overturned on its side, its windows shattered. A bicycle lay twisted in the street, half buried under debris. The world he had known, the streets he had walked for years, were unrecognizable. Then through the chaos, something caught his attention. A sound, so faint that it almost got lost in the storm's fury. It wasn't the wailing sirens or the cries of the people. It was softer, weaker. A sound that sent a shiver down Rusty's spine. A cry. Rusty froze, his ears twitching. He turned his head, trying to pinpoint the source. The wind howled, making it difficult to tell where it was coming from. He took a few steps forward, sniffing the air. The scent of wet earth and broken wood filled his nose, but beneath it, something else lingered. A familiar, delicate scent. A human, a small one. Rusty's body tensed. He had spent years avoiding humans, staying in the shadows where they wouldn't chase him away. But this was different. This wasn't someone yelling at him to leave or shooing him away with a broom. This was a cry for help. Driven by something beyond instinct, Rusty bolted forward, following the sound. His paws kicked up mud as he darted through the ruins of what had once been home. A broken fence lay in splinters, and a mailbox hung loosely from a bent post. He leaped over fallen beams and maneuvered through shattered glass, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of the storm. The cry grew louder. Rusty pushed forward, his nose leading the way. Then, under the collapsed remains of a house, he saw it, a small bundle of fabric, barely visible beneath the debris. The crying was coming from inside. A baby. Rusty's eyes widened. The wind screamed around him, but he didn't hesitate. Lowering his head, he dug his paws into the rubble and started to dig. Rusty's paws worked furiously, kicking up dirt and broken wood as he dug through the wreckage. Splinters scratched his nose, and dust clogged his throat, but he didn't stop. The muffled cries beneath the rubble grew weaker, and that terrified him more than the storm still raging above. The collapsed house was barely standing, its shattered walls leaning at dangerous angles. Rusty knew he had to be careful. One wrong move could send more debris crashing down. He sniffed the air, his keen senses guiding him closer. The scent of fear and something warm, something alive, filled his nose. He let out a soft whine, hoping whoever was trapped beneath could hear him. A broken wooden beam blocked his path. Rusty dug his paws into the mud, pushing his body against it. It was heavy, too heavy for him to move alone. He barked, hoping someone, anyone, would come to help. But the storm had left the town in chaos, and no one was close enough to hear. He had no choice. He had to do this himself. Rusty shifted his weight and squeezed through a narrow gap in the wreckage, his body scraping against sharp edges. He ignored the pain. He was close now. The cries were just beneath him. With renewed determination, he pressed his nose against the fabric of the blanket peeking through the rubble. A tiny, trembling hand reached out. Rusty froze. The baby was still alive. His breath came in quick bursts as he nudged the small fingers, hoping to comfort the child. The baby let out a weak whimper, barely able to cry anymore. Rusty whined in response, his mind racing. He had to get the baby out before it was too late. Carefully, he gripped the blanket with his teeth. His jaws were strong, but he held on gently, knowing how fragile the child was. He pulled, inch by inch, feeling resistance from the debris still trapping the baby. He growled and pulled harder, his legs straining. The wreckage shifted dangerously, and for a terrifying moment, he thought it might collapse further. But then, with one final tug, the baby came free. Rusty stumbled backward, the child cradled carefully in the folds of the blanket. He could feel the small body trembling, barely moving. The storm howled around them, and Rusty knew they weren't safe yet. He couldn't stay here. He had to find help. His eyes darted toward the distance. Somewhere beyond the wreckage, beyond the destruction, there were people. He had seen them gathering at a shelter, heard the voices of rescuers calling out for survivors. It was far, but he had no other option. Lowering his head, he adjusted his grip on the blanket, making sure the baby was secure. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and ran. The wind lashed against his face, the rain stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. His paws pounded against the broken ground as he weaved through fallen debris. The baby let out a soft whimper, and Rusty's heart pounded harder. He had to keep going. He had to save this child. Rusty ran, his legs burning with every stride. The baby was secure in his gentle grip, wrapped in the tattered blanket. The storm had left the town in ruins, and every step was a challenge. Fallen power lines crackled with electricity, shattered glass glistened in the mud, and broken beams jutted out like jagged teeth. But none of that mattered. The only thing Rusty cared about was getting the baby to safety. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the ground beneath him. Rain pounded against his fur, but he didn't slow down. His paws slipped in the mud, but he caught himself, his body moving on instinct. He had never carried anything so precious before, and the weight of responsibility pressed on him harder than the storm ever could. A distant siren pierced through the night. Rusty's ears perked up. Rescuers. They were close, but not close enough. He knew he had to keep going. As he approached a collapsed street, Rusty skidded to a stop. The road had caved in, leaving a deep trench in front of him. Water pooled at the bottom, and the wreckage of a car lay partially submerged. He hesitated for the first time. The trench was too wide to jump, and there was no safe way around. The baby let out a tiny whimper, snapping Rusty out of his fear. He had to find a way across. Rusty's eyes darted around, searching for an answer. A fallen tree stretched across part of the trench, forming a narrow bridge. It was risky, but it was his only option. Lowering his body, he stepped onto the trunk. The wood was slick with rain, and it creaked beneath his weight. One wrong step, and they could both fall. Slowly, carefully, Rusty moved forward, balancing each step. The wind howled, shaking the tree beneath him. His heart pounded, but he kept his grip firm on the blanket. The baby was silent now, barely moving, and that terrified him more than anything. Halfway across, a gust of wind nearly knocked him off. Rusty dug his claws into the bark, steadying himself. His breaths came fast, but he didn't stop. He pressed forward, one careful step at a time. Finally, he reached the other side. His paws hit solid ground, and relief flooded through him, but there was no time to celebrate. He had to keep running. The storm had begun to weaken, but the damage was done. Houses lay in ruins, cars were overturned, and the streets were barely recognizable. Rusty ran through the devastation, his muscles aching, his vision blurred by the rain. But then he saw them. A group of people stood in the distance, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Rescuers. Survivors. Hope. Rusty let out a desperate bark, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Heads turned. People gasped. Someone shouted, pointing at the muddy, rain-soaked dog carrying a child in his mouth. Then, all at once, they ran toward him. Rusty didn't slow down until he reached them. As soon as he stopped, hands reached out, gently taking the baby from his jaws. The rescuers worked quickly, unwrapping the child and checking for injuries. For a moment, there was silence. Then, "The baby's alive!" A cheer erupted from the crowd. Rusty stood frozen, panting heavily. His legs trembled, but he refused to fall. A woman pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. She saw the baby, gasped, and collapsed to her knees. "My baby, my baby." Rusty watched as the mother cradled the child, sobbing with relief. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. He had done it. He had saved a life. Rusty stood motionless, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. The storm still rumbled in the distance, but the worst had passed. Around him, people gathered, whispering in awe. Flashlights flickered, illuminating the mud-covered dog who had done the impossible. A rescuer knelt beside him, reaching out cautiously. "Where did you come from, boy?" she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Rusty barely heard her. His focus was on the baby. Wrapped in warm blankets now, the child stirred, letting out a weak but unmistakable cry. The mother sobbed harder, pressing her lips against the baby's forehead. "You saved my child," she whispered, looking at Rusty with tears in her eyes. "You saved my baby." Rusty's tail twitched. He didn't understand her words, but he recognized the tone, gratitude, relief, something deeper. But before he could react, his legs wobbled, and he collapsed into the mud. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "He's exhausted," someone shouted. "Get him some water." A rescuer rushed forward with a bottle, pouring cool water into a shallow bowl. Rusty's ears twitched at the sound, but his body was too drained to move. A hand gently lifted his head, guiding his muzzle to the water. He lapped at it weakly, the taste refreshing but not enough to erase the burning ache in his muscles. The mother, still cradling her child, wiped her eyes and turned to the rescuers. "We can't just leave him," she said firmly. "This dog saved my baby. We need to help him." A paramedic checked Rusty carefully, running gentle hands over his mud-soaked fur. "No serious injuries," she said, relief in her voice. "Just exhaustion and dehydration." The mother nodded, determination shining through her exhaustion. "Then I'm taking him with me." Rusty blinked up at her, his tired mind struggling to process what was happening. He had spent his life wandering, surviving on scraps, always moving, never belonging anywhere. But this woman, the one whose baby he had saved, was looking at him like he was more than just a stray, like he was important. The rescuers carefully lifted him into a blanket, carrying him toward a nearby truck. He barely had the strength to lift his head, but as the mother climbed in beside him, holding her child close, he felt something warm settle in his chest. For the first time in his life, Rusty wasn't alone. As the truck rumbled forward, leaving the devastation behind, the mother reached out and rested a hand on Rusty's head. He let out a tired sigh, sinking into the comfort of her touch. "You're a hero," she whispered, "and from now on, you're coming home with us." Rusty didn't know what home felt like. But as he closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him under, he thought, maybe this was it. The shelter was buzzing with activity. Volunteers rushed between cots, tending to the injured, handing out blankets, and comforting the shaken survivors. The air was thick with the scent of damp clothing, disinfectant, and the lingering fear of what had just happened. The storm had passed, but its destruction remained. Among the crowd, a mother sat on the cold floor, staring blankly at the empty space in front of her. Her arms were wrapped around herself as though she were holding something that wasn't there. Her lips trembled, her body swayed slightly, but she made no sound. She had screamed until her throat was raw, cried until no more tears would come. Her baby was gone. She had searched through the wreckage of her home with bleeding hands, clawing at the rubble, calling out until her voice broke. Rescuers had told her to stay at the shelter, that searching in the dark was too dangerous, but how could she? How could she rest when her child was still out there, alone? Then she heard it. A commotion at the entrance. Gasps, shouts, people rushing towards something. A voice broke through the chaos. "The baby's alive." Her breath caught in her throat. She barely registered her own movements as she scrambled to her feet, pushing past bodies, nearly tripping in her desperation. The world around her blurred, but she could see something. A group of rescuers, their flashlights illuminating a soaked, mud-covered figure standing among them. A dog. Her heart pounded, confusion mixing with hope and terror. And then she saw it, the small bundle being lifted from the ground. The rescuers were checking the baby, wrapping them in dry blankets, talking quickly, but she didn't hear any of it. She only saw the tiny hand peeking out from the blanket. It was the same blanket she had wrapped her baby in before the storm hit. Her vision swam, and for a moment, she thought her body would give out. But then she heard the cry. Weak, soft, but real. Her knees buckled as she reached out. "And my baby?" The rescuers turned at the sound of her voice, and in an instant, the baby was in her arms. She gasped, clutching the child to her chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her own. A choked sob escaped her lips as she pressed her forehead against the baby's, whispering words of disbelief, relief, and endless gratitude. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up. The dog, the one responsible for bringing her baby back, stood motionless, his body trembling with exhaustion. His fur was matted with dirt and rain, his legs unsteady, but his eyes never left her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know where he had come from or how he had done what no one else could. But she knew one thing. This dog had saved her child. With tears still glistening in her eyes, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the top of his muddy head. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Rusty let out a quiet breath, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion. He sank to the ground, too weak to move, but for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known before. He belonged. Rusty lay on a soft blanket, his body aching but warm for the first time in what felt like forever. The chaos of the shelter continued around him. Rescuers moving back and forth, people crying, talking, holding each other. But he was safe. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to run. Beside him, the mother held her baby close, rocking gently as she murmured soft words. She hadn't let go since the moment Rusty had brought the child back. Her hands trembled, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from relief, from gratitude. A rescue worker knelt beside Rusty, offering him water. He lifted his head weakly, lapping at the cool liquid. It soothed his parched throat, but his body still felt heavy, drained from his journey. The mother looked over, her tear-streaked face softening. She reached out, running her fingers gently through Rusty's fur. He tensed for a moment, unused to a touch that wasn't meant to push him away. But her hand was warm, comforting. "You saved my baby," she whispered. Rusty let out a soft sigh, resting his head on his paws. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion behind them. A doctor approached, kneeling beside the woman and checking the baby's tiny hands and feet. "Your child is a miracle," he said with a smile. "No serious injuries, just cold and dehydrated. If this dog hadn't found them when he did." His voice trailed off, but the unspoken words were clear. The mother clutched the baby tighter. She turned to Rusty again, her eyes shining. "He's not just a stray," she murmured. "He's a hero." Around them, people whispered in awe. A stray dog, braving the storm, risking his life to save a child. Some had seen him arrive, carrying the baby in his jaws, pushing through the wreckage despite the exhaustion in his limbs. Others had only heard the story, but their expressions were the same: astonishment, admiration, respect. A volunteer approached with a hesitant smile. "Does he belong to anyone?" The mother shook her head. "He does now." Rusty's ears perked up slightly, but he was too tired to lift his head. The mother reached out, stroking his fur again, this time with a quiet certainty. "You're coming home with us," she whispered. Home. Rusty didn't know what that meant. His life had always been the streets, finding scraps, avoiding people who didn't want him around. But as the mother continued to pet him, as the baby made a soft cooing sound in her arms, something inside him shifted. For the first time, Rusty didn't feel like he had nowhere to go. For the first time, he wasn't just a stray. He was family. The storm had passed, but its scars remained. Broken houses, shattered windows, and scattered debris lined the streets as survivors worked together to rebuild. The town, once whole, now carried the weight of destruction, but also the strength of resilience. Amidst the recovery efforts, Rusty lay in the back seat of a car for the first time in his life. The gentle hum of the engine vibrated beneath him as he rested his head on a soft towel. His body was still sore, but warmth surrounded him. He wasn't alone anymore. The mother sat beside him, her baby wrapped in a fresh blanket, peacefully asleep in her arms. Every so often, she glanced at Rusty, her eyes filled with something he didn't fully understand, a kind of warmth of appreciation of something he had never received before. Love. The car rolled to a stop. Rusty lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. A house stood before him, not broken, not abandoned, but whole. A home. The door opened and a man rushed out, his face filled with worry. The mother stepped out of the car, tears brimming in her eyes. "He's alive," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Our baby is alive." The man let out a choked breath of relief, pulling her and the child into his arms. His hands shook as he touched the baby's face, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then his gaze shifted to Rusty. For a moment, there was silence. Rusty tensed, unsure of what would happen next. But then the man crouched down, his expression softening. "You're the reason my family is whole," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Rusty's tail thumped weakly against the seat. The man reached out, gently scratching behind Rusty's ear. "You saved my child," he murmured. "You saved everything." Rusty let out a contented sigh, leaning into the touch. The mother turned to her husband. "I want to keep him," she said, her voice firm. "He's not just a stray. He's ours now." The man nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Rusty blinked. "Ours." The words felt foreign but good. He had spent his life alone, scavenging for food, surviving on instinct. He had never belonged anywhere. Until now. It led him inside, where warm light bathed the living room. A soft bed of blankets had already been set up for him. A bowl of fresh water sat beside it. It was all so new, so strange. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he truly belonged here. But then, the baby stirred in the mother's arms, making a soft noise. Rusty's ears perked up. He had fought through fire and stormed for that tiny life, and now that life was safe. Rusty stepped forward, settling onto the blanket. It was soft, comfortable, warm. For the first time in his life, Rusty wasn't just surviving. He was home. Days passed, and the town slowly began to heal. People worked together to rebuild what was lost, finding hope in the smallest victories. But inside one home, a different kind of healing was taking place, one that had nothing to do with fixing broken buildings. Rusty lay on a soft bed near the fireplace, something he had never experienced before. The warmth seeped into his aching muscles, chasing away the cold that had been a constant companion for as long as he could remember. The scent of home filled his nose, not of damp streets and discarded food, but of fresh bread, clean blankets, and something else. Love. The baby was safe in the mother's arms, cooing softly, their tiny fingers curling and uncurling. Rusty watched, his golden eyes filled with quiet devotion. The child was the reason he had fought through the storm, braved the wreckage, and pushed his body beyond its limits. He had saved a life. But in a way, that life had saved him too. The mother sat beside him, running a gentle hand through his fur. "You're staying with us, Rusty," she murmured. "You're family now." Rusty didn't fully understand her words, but he understood her tone, the warmth in her voice. His tail thumped against the floor in slow, steady beats. The father walked in, carrying a new collar in his hands. He knelt beside Rusty and held it out. "This is for you, buddy," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Rusty sniffed the collar, then looked up at the man's face. There was no fear, no hesitation, only trust. As the father fastened the collar around his neck, a wave of emotion surged through Rusty. He had never had anything of his own before. No home, no name. But now he had both. The baby let out a soft giggle, reaching toward Rusty. The mother laughed. Looks like someone wants to say thank you. Rusty lifted his head, allowing the baby's tiny fingers to graze his nose. The small touch sent warmth through his entire body. The storm had tried to take everything away, but against all odds, Rusty had fought back. He had found a purpose, a family, a place where he belonged. And as he lay there, surrounded by love, he finally understood. He was home, and he would never be alone again.